The kiddos can be dismissed to Children's Church if they would like, if they haven't already gone. This morning, I would like to recognize a couple of special people who are with us this morning. One of them you know, Pastor John Robbins is back after a long service up in Meeker. He has handed off the church to a new pastor who started last week. And so we're glad to have you back with us for whatever time the Lord sees fit to leave you with us. And then this morning we have our new student minister to students, Bruce McKee is somewhere in the building. I don't know where he is, but he's here. So if you see a new guy walking around who acts like he's supposed to be here, that's Bruce. And he'll be working with our students at least for the foreseeable future. And be sure to make him feel welcome as he starts his tenure with us this morning, and will be here with us for a while. But again, it's a good morning here at Bookcliff, and we are glad that you're here with us. We are going to be in Genesis chapter 25, 26, and a little bit of 27. Don't worry, the football games don't start till later today, so we have plenty of time. And all of our teams are out, it appears, so we're all good. Well, for most of us, they're out, so... But it's an interesting place we find ourselves in our story, in our chronicle of redemption this morning. We've been on this journey for a while. We've been on it since October, so we've come a long way. We started seeing the sovereignty of God on full display, time and time again. In the beginning, in Genesis 1, we saw where God took great energy and He took great detail in forming and filling the earth, not leaving any effort or design out of place, but He went to extreme detail and care to form, to fill, to make Adam and Eve in His perfect design, to put everything in its exact place. And even then, we know that the salvation plan was already in place before the creation of the world. And we know this from what we see in the New Testament. Ephesians 1, 4, and 5 says, even as He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before Him. In love, He predestined us for adoption to Himself as sons through Christ Jesus, according to the purpose of His will. So we know that even in Genesis 1, when He was forming, filling, and creating everything perfectly, the plan of salvation was already in place pre-Genesis 3, pre-fall, pre the story of redemption in Genesis 3:15, where He says that one is going to come from the seed of Eve that's going to rise up and conquer evil. We know that even before any of that came into place, the plan of salvation was already in there. It wasn't that we come to Genesis 3 and that we have to have a backup plan, that we have to have we got to hit the red button, got to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to put the cat back in the bag, how are we going to deal with this. But the plan of redemption, the calling of His people was completely in place. It was already there. And for the last month, 2 months, since right before Christmas, we've been looking specifically at the story of Abraham, where Abraham leaves his land in Genesis chapter 12, where he's called to go to a place that God is going to show him. He's called to leave his inheritance. He's called to leave his people. He's called to leave his wealth. He's called to go. And that God is going to take him to a place that He's eventually going to give to His people, that He's going to make His descendants as numerous as the stars. He's going to, from Him is now going to come this promise that we saw in Genesis 3:15, which we know is the proto-evangelion, which is the gospel. The one is going to come from Him that is going to be the conqueror, that's going to crush the head of Satan. And so we know that coming from this line of Abraham is going to be the conqueror, the one that's going to crush Satan. And so all throughout this time of the life of Abraham, we're looking for that. We're looking for that to come to fruition. But the problem is one, Abraham struggles with faith. Abraham struggles with trusting God. But the ultimate problem is Abraham and Sarah are barren. We saw that over and over again in Genesis 15. That even Abraham comes to God and says, how are you working this out? Because we don't have a child. And so they come together. They concoct their own plan for them to have a child. And Abraham and Sarah say, okay, you're going to lay with Hagar, you're going to have your own child, and then birth Ishmael. We know Ishmael wasn't the planned child. Ishmael wasn't the way that God was going to go about redeeming the world. So God comes back and says, no, Sarah is going to have a child. It's going to be from my plan, not your plan. And so we see later on Isaac is born. Ishmael is sent away from the people of God. Isaac is birthed into the people of God, and the promise is coming through Isaac. So now you have Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Ishmael sent out. Now, this is the same story that we saw in Genesis 3, 4, and 5, where there are two distinct people on the planet. There are people who are going to worship God, and there are people who are going to reject God. In Genesis chapter 15, 16, 17, all the way through 20, there are people who are going to follow God through the line of Isaac. There are people who are going to reject God, people who are already living, who are sinning, from the Canaanites through the line of Noah, through Noah's grandson Canaanite, and now through the line of Ishmael, people who are sent away, rejected by God because they reject God. And now we see this line going even further as Isaac continues the line. So now the promise is going to continue through Isaac. Now, just a couple weeks ago, before Josh preached last week, we saw that the problem was Abraham was getting old. The promised line is Isaac. Isaac needs a wife. So Abraham sends his servant back to his homeland, to Haran, a 400-plus mile journey back to the homeland to find a wife, because he's not supposed to marry with the neighbors. We need to keep the line pure, because unless Isaac were to be tempted to follow the false gods of the Canaanite people. So Abraham sends his servant back to the land of Haran, back to his homeland, a 400-mile journey back to find a wife. Well, the servant gets there, he stops at the spring, he waters his camels, he gets water for himself through Rebekah, who comes out to the spring. Now, we had a lot of fun with that sermon. If you weren't here for that, go watch it online. We probably had too much fun with it. But Rebekah comes out, waters the camels, gives water to the servant stays overnight. Rebekah says, I will go back with you. She agrees to go back and to marry Isaac, sight unseen. Talk about faith. So she, much like Abraham in Genesis 12, packs up, leaves everything behind. She leaves her family. She leaves her inheritance. She leaves everything to go to the land that God has promised, to go to the man that God has promised, and to follow God faithfully. Sight unseen faithfully. Where we ended off in Genesis chapter 24, we see Isaac has been meditating off in the wilderness, or off in the desert really, and he's coming back, and Rebekah is riding in on the camel, not a donkey. Wrong story, wrong time period. Probably a few hundred years too early. Rebekah is riding in on the camel. They see each other from a distance. She slides down off the camel. Can you imagine a 400-mile journey on the camel? We think driving to Denver in a car is a long trip. 400 miles on a camel. She slides down. She says, who is the bloke over there? And the servant says, that's Isaac. That's the one whom you're going to marry. Now we know Sarah has passed away. Abraham has bought land to bury Sarah, which he will also be buried in, and then the rest of his line will be buried in. Rebekah takes her place in the tent of Sarah, the matriarch, and she becomes the new matriarch of the land. And it says at the end of chapter 24, the beautiful verse that we see there at the end of chapter 24, and Isaac loved her. And that's the last we saw of them in chapter 24. So today we come to this story and we find Isaac and Rebekah on a journey that's quite unexpected from where we last left off. Now we're going to kind of take this in segments. Usually I like to read through the whole thing, but like last week, or like 2 weeks ago, this is a long narrative. So we're going to take this in sections and we're going to kind of read through this. So stick with me. If you read ahead, you're going to blow the story. This is a fun one too. So kind of stick with me. Don't spoil this one. No spoiler alerts here. Let's take this step by step. It's going to be fun. Beginning in chapter 25, verse 19, let's read together. And it says, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac, underline this, Isaac prayed to the Lord his wife because she was, circle, barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Notice this, verse 21, huge point, highlight, circle, blow it out, whatever you do. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Can you imagine this? She is confronted at a spring by a servant from Abraham to go travel to a land that she doesn't know, to marry a guy that she has no clue who he is. She goes 400 miles to marry this dude. She gets there, and some 20 years later, she still hasn't had a child. She's barren. At this point, are you not questioning your faith? Like, God, did I do the wrong thing here? Like, I traveled 400 miles. I left everything behind. What's the deal here? I thought this was your plan. The whole point, and Abraham sending his servant back to get me was so that the line of Abraham could go on, so that there could be a multitude, as many as the stars coming from the line of Abraham, so that there could be a righteous line here, so that Isaac wouldn't be tempted to worship the false gods, so that this could go on in the right way. And here we find years later, that Rebekah is barren, similar to the story that we saw in Abraham and Sarah, that she was barren. After all those years, she is almost 100 when she has Isaac. And here we find a similar story, that she is barren. And what's the question here? Why? Think about this for a second. Would it bring about a crisis of faith for you? That if you had gone to this extent to marry your husband, who you did sight unseen, to follow God, to be obedient to God, and you get there, and your responsibility as a wife in a Hebrew culture and an Israelite culture here is to bear multiple children, and you get there and you can't even have a child. And the promise to this whole line of people is that you're going to be a nation. You're going to be a multitude. This is your whole purpose in life, and you can't have children. Were you the wrong person? Were you too eager? Were you getting, too homesick? Were you just looking for an escape? Think about the questions you might be having here. In verse 21, we learn much about what's been going on in the family of Isaac and Rebekah, but we can more see what's going on in the hand of God. For surely what seemed like a divine appointed marriage from the motherland, the perfect comfort in Isaac's time of mourning after his mother's death, was not all rosy and wonderful. But rather, the life of the chosen one of God was fraught with struggles and toils and struggles of his father and mother carried on into his life. The struggles of desiring a child and the lack of bearing a child are real. They're real struggles. The questioning, the wondering, the unmet desires, the questioning of faith are all here in one verse. Remember, the narrative of Sarah's barrenness goes on for chapters. And here in one verse is all we have about Rebekah and Isaac. And here the dramatic sequence is presented and comes to a conclusion right here as God grants the prayer. And it says, Rebekah conceives. But can we just stop here in these opening verses and recognize what's going on in the life and the family? And remember that all of Genesis so far is about trusting, about faith, about the sovereignty of God, and the design of God's plan, even when we don't understand it. Even when it doesn't make sense to us, it's about who God is, about what his plans are, not about our plans and what we understand and about how we understand, but about who he is and about his design and his plan. Because even in Genesis 1 and 2, as he is forming and filling, it's about how he is forming and filling in his perfect will. Because think about this, and this is a complete sidebar over here. Can you imagine being a lifeguard on the side of God creating the planet? Think about this for a second. He's over here putting the stars in place, and he's over here putting the water in place, and you're just sitting there thinking, I'm not sure I like that fish. Or why are you going to create a shark that's going to eat that fish? Why do we need sharks? Why do we need ants? Ants are demon creatures. And so you're sitting over here in the lifeguard chair while God is over here creating. Remember, he didn't create man until that was all done. Right? probably for a very distinct reason. He didn't need our input in the process. But here, as we're living life in a fallen world, we see the effect of sin and the consequences of sin lived out in real time, right? And so we're seeing this come to fruition, and it was never meant that woman would be barren. The whole purpose of marriage was that be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That was the original command given. But sin destroys that perfection. It says, in pain you will bear children. In pain you will work the ground. Barrenness was never part of the plan. It's part of the brokenness of sin. So if you're struggling with this is part of the sin nature of the world. It's part of the brokenness of the world. And we see this come to fruition in the life of Sarah, who is bringing about the promised line to the multitude of the nations, in the life of Rebekah, because it's Isaac and Rebekah now who are to bring apart the multitude of the nations. And so now it's Isaac and Rebekah, and the line stops. So it's God who must act. In 21 it says, God grants the prayer, and Rebekah conceives. And we pick right up into verse 22, and this is a verse for moms, because men are never going to understand this next paragraph. Ever. Praise the Lord. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. When the days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red in his blood and his body, like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Catch this. The desire for so long was just to conceive, and now she has conceived, but there is a war going on inside of her. Moms, I'm sure you can picture this somehow. And she cries out to God, why is this happening to me? What is going on? The inference of deep pain and a lack of understanding of what is happening to her body during this process. And she turns to God, and God answers her, there are 2 nations in your womb, and they are going to be divided, and the one shall serve the other, and one is going to be stronger, and the older shall serve the younger. And this is not the response she was looking for here, but she gets the picture that there are, even in her womb, there are 2 nations that are warring against each other. And can you imagine this? Can you imagine 2 nations at war in the womb? The cry of pain is real, but the answer is not expected, hardly understood. For here God speaks to Isaac and Rebekah, pronouncing that this is going to be a separation. This isn't going to be a joyful birth. It's going to lead a joyful life of a multitude happening, that they're going to be happy and living together for the rest of their lives. No, this is a pronouncement of a judgment of 2 children that are going to go their separate ways. They're going to split the household forever. The younger son is going to be the one who's to be served by the older, which is completely counter to what we know of the Hebrew people and all of Old Testament culture. The older is supposed to receive the inheritance. The older is the one who's supposed to rise up and replace the father and take care of the land and inherit everything, and to be the one who's to be the redeemer when the younger passes. He's supposed to be the one to take the mantle of the father and to carry on when the father passes. But here it says the younger one is going to be the one who rises up into the place and assumes that role of the father when the father passes. He is the one. God pronounces this differently. Again, just like barrenness is not a surprise for us in Genesis, barrenness happened in the life of Sarah. This also isn't a surprise for us when we look at the older serving the younger. If we go back in Genesis to the story of Cain and Abel, Cain, the older son, who is a keeper of the livestock. Or Cain, the older son, who's the farmer, and Abel, who's the keeper of the animals. Cain is the one who rises up in anger and kills Abel. Cain is the one who is cast out. Cain is not the one who assumes the role of carrying on the line of Adam, who carries on the line of the promise of the one who is going to bring about the conqueror. It's Seth, the youngest child, the one who is also called tame, the calm one who carries on the line of redemption. It's in this moment that we remember that God sovereignly acts on behalf of his people for the good of his people, even when it's hard to understand. At the beginning of this family drama, both Isaac and Rebekah now know that the younger will be the one to carry on the line. The question is now, how is the story to proceed? In verse 29, we pick up there. It says, once when Jacob was cooking a stew, now this is going to get really interesting for those of you who like to cook. Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. And therefore his name was called Edom, which is an important name for all of the rest of Old Testament history. And Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. And Esau said, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? And Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and he drank and rose and he went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Esau gave his birthright up for a bowl of lentil stew. Man, they could have been living in 2017 and been hippies for the lentil stew. I mean, it's come back in style. The boys have become older and their personalities are coming more and more into the picture. Esau is a man of the field, a hunter, a ruddy son who provides game for his family. He's been out hunting while Jacob has been around the tents, taking care of the livestock around the tents, and has been taking care of the garden. Esau comes back. Jacob is in the tent cooking. Esau is starving to the point of death, willing to give up his birthright for a bowl of stew and some bread. Here in this moment, we find a cunning brother willing to take from his older brother in the moment of need. And a brother who succumbs to the momentary desires of his stomach. Here in these few verses, we find the nature of men. We see them both. We find a shrewd businessman, per se, here in Jacob, and the other seeking instant gratification, right? Both are leading to a mutual self-destruction, and both are ultimately self-serving. In this moment, however, we continue to see the plans of God come into the picture further, for we have already been told that the older will serve the younger. We cannot let that slip from our minds. The older is going to serve the younger. The older is going to be the one who loses the inheritance. Now the older is forfeiting the family inheritance to the younger, and the older has completely forfeited his right to anything in the family. He has, in essence, become the younger all over a bowl of stew, a piece of bread, in the moment of just for gratification of his stomach. He has given it all over. All that was already given over to Jacob, he has now said, it is yours. Now he doesn't know that God has said that he is going to serve the younger, but now he is forfeiting it to Jacob. It is Jacob's because he has willingly said, it is yours, because if I don't eat, I'm going to die anyway, so it might as well be yours anyway. So this is yours. I give it willingly to you. The plans of God are being revealed and shown clearly here. It is a clear picture. So we could stop the story here and we could say, what God said would happen has happened. Close the book. We're done. We see it. Esau has forfeited his ability to lead the family because he has decided instead it's better to have self-gratification, and it is time to move on. Next chapter. Let's see what else happens. Isaac is obviously going to die. He's old in age. It is time to move on with the story. Next. Right? That's where we are in this picture. But no. In verse 27, the drama only expounds more upon itself. It says, when Isaac was old, his eyes were so dim that he could not see. He called Esau, his older son, to him and said, my son. And he answered, he said, here I am. And he said, behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now, hold on a second. Isaac and Esau are in the womb. Esau and Jacob were in the womb. Rebekah cries out to God, what is going on inside of me? God reveals to Isaac and Rebekah, the older is going to serve the younger. In this moment of old age, Isaac speaks out to his favored son, and he makes a direct contradiction to what he knows God has told him. A direct contradiction. He instead makes plans to gratify his stomach. Similar to what Esau has just done, Isaac makes plans to satisfy his desire to show love to his favorite son. Isaac makes plans to impose his own will instead of the will of God. In this moment of old age, Isaac leans on himself. Unlike his father Abraham, remember Abraham, who appeared to grow more faithful and wise in his old age, Isaac appears to become a self-determined man here. He is going to take matters into his own hands. He calls Esau to himself and sends him out to go and gather his tools, to go to the field, to go hunting, and bring back a tasty meal for him so that he may bless Esau before he dies. Because that's the ultimate plan here. That's what God wanted, was that Isaac bless Esau, right? That was the plan. The faithful line of Abraham to go through Esau, right? That was how God had laid it out. No, that was completely selfish. But let's even draw this back a little bit further. Let's stop and think about this for a moment. This is the same Isaac whom, when he was a young boy, God told Abraham to take him up to the mountain, to sacrifice him, to show that he was faithful. This is the same Isaac. Can you remember this? In Genesis chapter 22, where we were right before Christmas, God said to him, take your son, your beloved son, up, who's supposed to carry on the line of God, take him up to the mountain, bind him, and lay him on the altar and sacrifice him to me. And so, remember, he did this. Abraham went up to the mountain, he bound up his son, he put him on top of the wood, and he raised the knife over his son's head. This is the exact same Isaac. You would think that in his old age, Isaac would be flashbacking through life memories, and I'm sure your dad holding a knife over your face is not a memory that you quickly forget. Oh, yeah, I just wiped that one from my mind. No, your dad is about to kill you. But then God provides a ram that's stuck over there in the bushes, and it speaks through an angel, and then in that moment you're released. You sacrifice not the angel, you sacrifice, that would be bad, you sacrifice the goat, and you recognize your father's faith, and y'all stop there and you worship. That should be something you remember your father's faith. You remember your father's faith when in his old age, he sends his servant back to his homeland to find a bride for you. Rebekah comes by faith to marry you. You piece these. This is the same. These aren't different Isaacs. I know we find people with the same name throughout. This is the same person. And in this moment of old age, he decides, maybe God got something wrong, and we're going to course correct here. God is going this direction. We're going to go here, and hopefully we're going to bring it back this way. God will take my will that I'm imposing, and he'll have to bring it back this way, right? He has to. If I go this way just a little bit, because I'm of the line of God, God says he's going to redeem his people through, he has to course correct it back this way, right? He has to. That's what God has to do. Do we not rationalize things that way? He has to do it this way. That's what he's thinking. Isaac just ignores God. He decides to make the decisions for himself and sends Esau off to hunt, preparing to bless him over Jacob, the one whom God has set aside to carry on the blessing of the nations, the one whom a multitude will come. Now, as we move on, it says, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt the game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 young goats so that I may prepare for them delicious food for your father, such as he loves, and you shall bring it to your father to eat so that he may bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will fill me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. And his mother said to him in verse 13, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and bring them to me. And in verse 14 it says, so he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck, and put the delicious food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. The plot thickens. The tent walls were only so thick, you know. Eavesdropping was a hard thing to do back then. The insulation in the tents was wonderful, you know, could keep that heat out and the heat of the sun out and the cold air in, you know. It was great. So she had to try real hard to eavesdrop. Probably not at all. Rebekah is listening to this plan unfold as Isaac is speaking to Esau, and this is not what she wants. Not what she wants. But does this make her heart righteous? That's the question we have to ask. From her actions, we can almost assuredly say no. She responds out of a desire for her favorite son to receive the blessing, not this ruddy, hairy child, rather this helpful child who is around the house, the child who takes care of the animals, the one who brings in the vegetables, the tame child, the one whom she is pulling for here. She wants that one to receive the blessing. So Rebekah goes to Jacob with this elaborate plan to confuse her husband Isaac and steal the blessing that God has already promised and pronounced on Jacob from Esau. So part one of the plan is go get two goats, because we all know goats taste like wild game. Right? If you're going to compare an elk to a goat, I'm sure it's just the same. I don't make a habit of eating goat, but I'm sure it's there. 2, to cover the problem of being smooth skin, we'll take Esau's clothes and you will wear them. And we'll take the skin of the goats and we're going to cover your arms and we're going to cover your neck, and you'll be just like your brother. Foolproof plan. Jacob is apparently a little bit smarter than we would give him credit for. He says, but what if my father figures out what's going on and he just thinks I'm mocking him and he will curse me? Well, good question. You're wearing your brother's clothes, you're putting goat skins on your arm and on your neck. It's probably a mockable thing here. And part 3 of the plan, if Isaac curses you, let the curse be on me, not you, is what Rebekah says. We need to remember this phrase. Verse 13, let the curse be on me and not you. That's going to come into play as we end this story. Is this not becoming another circular story of the life of the family of Abraham? Remember, Abraham and Sarah decided that they're going to concoct a way for them to have a child. When they decided God had forgotten about them, they bring Hagar into the picture. Ishmael is born. They decided Abraham should do his own thing because maybe God wasn't working it out. God couldn't do this, right? So they had to, because the God who created everything apparently couldn't take care of this. And we might smile or we might jeer or we might laugh, but We quite often think the same thing. Here in this plan, Rebekah acts out of selfish ambition, not even recognizing the plan and sovereignty of God, but rather more concerned about her will, her favorite son, her plans. Her will be done on earth as it is in heaven. She, like Isaac, has become her own God. She, like Isaac, she, like Adam and Eve, have become their own gods. So in verse 18, when we pick up the story, he went to his father and said, "My father." And Isaac says, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near me, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." Isaac knows something's not right here. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, who felt him and said, "This is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him and he said, Are you really my son Esau?" And he answered him, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near to him, and he kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed." Jacob concedes to Rebekah's plan and puts on the goat skins, takes the food to his father, and says, "One, I am your firstborn, and I have done as you have told me." This is the first lie in deception, announcing to his father that he was his older brother. He is sold out to the lie now. There is no turning back, only going forward in this deception. Even in this moment, Isaac finds it odd that Esau has returned so quickly. How have you gone out? How have you gone out and killed the animal, brought it back, prepared it, cleaned it, cooked it, and brought it to me so quickly? Now, some of you guys, when you go hunting, you go out for like weeks and you still haven't brought anything back. So you can relate to this story. I mean, you go climb the mountain, you go up there, you start looking, you don't find anything, and you go out the next week and you go out the next month, and you take off a year from church, it seems like. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I miss y'all, you guys, and we have to start praying for you. We have to send out a search party. Are you coming back? Have you gone to another church? I mean, do you still love Jesus? What's going on? You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, Isaac here is starting to question, what's going on? How did you do this so quickly? What's happened here? So Isaac's picked up on this. But Jacob responds in a clever way. "The Lord your God granted me success." Have you seen how big this fish is? The Lord your God granted me success. The second lie is getting bolder. The first lie is misidentification. The second lie brings God into a story that is complete of deception, full of deception. God allowed me to find the animal more quickly. Your God, notice this, your God is brought into this. So 2 deceptions so far. The third lie, Isaac suspects something was off for a while, that they might be able to cook this meal, cover the skin of Jacob, but something about the voice just didn't sound right. It just wasn't right. "This is the voice of Jacob," Isaac says. "But the hands are the hands of Esau. Are you really my son Esau?" Isaac asked the direct question. He answered, "I am." I am. Now I'm grateful I don't have twins, because I can imagine what kind of trouble my twins would get in if they're coming from my line. I mean, Whitney blames everything my kids do on me. All the good stuff she claims, all the trouble they get into, she blames on me. So, I mean, I can imagine the kind of trouble twins in my family would get into. But the voice is different. And when Isaac addresses it, Jacob denies it again. "I am your son." So Isaac says, "Come near to me, kiss me, my son." And Isaac smells the garments, which are Esau's. The deception is complete. It's the smell of his favorite son. It's the smell of Esau. Isaac is content to move forward with the blessing, even though God has already commanded him not to. His stomach, his mind are satisfied, and he is ready to bless his favorite son. And with the kiss, it is sealed. Now, with a little bit of irony and foreshadowing here, we can look forward to the New Testament and remember that with the kiss, something else is sealed in the New Testament. The kiss of the betrayal of the Son of God. But we're just going to leave that hanging. And I encourage you to read that in Matthew. And in verse 28 it says, "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine, and let the people serve you and the nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and be blessed everyone who blesses you." The blessing that is of the land, bountiful grain and wine, but not just the inheritance of the land, but also notice this political power blessing that Isaac pronounces on Jacob, that the nations would bow down to him, that he would be the Lord over his brothers, that anyone who curses him would be cursed, and anyone who blesses him would be blessed. Here in this moment we see a direct contradiction to what God foretold Isaac and Rebekah when their children were in the womb. For in this moment Isaac believes he is blessing Esau. And if Esau he were blessing, he'd be going against the direct plan and will of God. However, in this moment of deception, Jacob is receiving the blessing that God had planned all along. In this moment of misleading by all involved, the sovereignty of God is still on display. For even the greatest plans of men cannot thwart the plan of God. Do we catch this? Even in this moment of misleading by the people and the men, the sovereignty of God is still on display. For all the plans that Isaac and Jacob and Rebekah and Esau had, the ultimate plan of God cannot be thwarted by the greatest plans of men. We need to know that, to remember that, to dwell on that. To think that even if we take our own course and God's going to course correct and he has to bring it back this way, God's ultimate plans will not be thwarted by whatever conniving plans we can come up with. Verse 30, as we begin to wrap, says, "As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came to him from his hunting, and he also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, 'Let my father arise and eat of his son's gain, that you may bless me.' His father Isaac said to him, 'Who are you?' And he said, 'I am your son, your firstborn Esau.' And then Isaac trembled very violently, and he said, 'Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you came? I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed.' And as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, 'Bless me, even me also, O my father.' But Isaac said, 'Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing.' And Esau said, 'Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing.' Then he said, 'Have you not reserved blessing for me?' And Isaac answered to Esau, 'Behold, I have made him lord over you and all his brothers. I have given to him for servants and with grain and wine, and have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?' Esau said to his father, 'Have you but one blessing for my father? Bless me even also, O my father.' And Esau lifted up his voice and he wept. And he wept. And then Isaac his father answered and said to him, 'Behold, away from the fatness of the earth your dwelling shall be, and away from the dew of the heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck.'" Can you feel the tension in this moment. Isaac is finishing the blessing of Jacob. Esau is outside skinning and preparing the animal. Isaac is kissing Jacob. Esau is cooking the feast. The blessing is complete. Jacob walks out of the tent. Esau is plating the meal and comes from the other side of the camp to bring his father the meal. And they just barely miss each other in the completion of what's going on. What would Jacob's response to Esau been when he walks out and he says, "Why are you wearing my clothes?" And here Esau enters the tent of his father and brings the feast that he has asked for, only to find that his father has just eaten. And Isaac trembles violently, realizing what has just happened. He trembles violently, realizing that the hand of God is in what has just happened. He realizes that he has been caught, and he stands exposed in the eyes of God and in the eyes of people, that his selfishness, his unrighteousness, his sin is exposed. He trembles violently. He is in the wrong here. He has done what is wrong here. In this moment, the two men are inconsolable, for Isaac has blessed Jacob, and Esau feels like he has been robbed twice. Isaac has blessed Jacob, and he realizes that he has done what is right in the sight of God, but was wrong in his heart because he thought he was blessing Esau, which was contradictory to the plan of God. Contradictory to what God foretold would happen. This wasn't the plan. Isaac informs Esau of the future. By the sword you will live, you will serve your brother, and when you grow restless, you will break the yoke from your neck. This is not what Esau was looking for this day. This is not what Esau was wanting. He thought he was coming back with this feast to receive the inheritance, to receive the love, to receive the honor of being the oldest son. But in this moment of trembling, of screaming from Isaac, Isaac has to pause. And then Isaac has to pronounce the right blessing on Esau. Because we could quickly read over the violence and the trembling and say, oh, well, that's just anger for what Jacob has done. And yes, it's anger, but it's also anger over the sin that's been exposed. And when we read the blessing that's being pronounced on Esau, we read the right blessing, the one that's of God, the original blessing that was to be passed down to Esau. He would be a wanderer. He would be the one who would go out. Jacob would be the one who would carry on the line of the conqueror. Jacob would be the one who would be the promised line, who the multitude of the nations would come, who would be a blessing to all people. Esau would be the one sent out from the camp. This is the way that the plan would go. In verse 41, it says, Now Esau hated Jacob because of his blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise and flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day? The anger of the older brother turns to the point where Esau plans to kill Jacob. Rebekah learns of the plan, and she calls Jacob in and says, Your brother is going to kill you because of what we've done. Remember the curse in verse 13? Let the curse be on me and not on you. She thought she was only sending Jacob away for a little bit of time. Little did she know that she would end up sending Jacob away for the rest of her life, and she would never see him again. She would never see her son again. In the very beginning of this scheme, she had it all planned out. She thought it would work out. She also here sends Jacob back to marry someone from the homeland, lest he, like Abraham knew, would marry a neighbor at the end of the chapter in verses 46. But she had no idea he would be gone so long. And in his anger and his bitterness, we'll see later on in chapter 28 and 29 that Esau takes 3 wives from the Hittite people. And the story of Esau wouldn't end throughout the life of Jesus. The Edomite people would become a constant source of pain and trouble for the Hebrew people. There would be a people that would constantly attack the Hebrew people. There would be a people who would join up with the Babylonian people. Even to the time of Jesus, the Edomite people would be known as joining up with the Romans. And we're even there on the day of the crucifixion of Jesus. The stories of sin come forward. Sin will be punished. And we could sit back and say, well, wasn't the ultimate plan, even in the mischievousness, even in the manipulation carried forward? Yes, but it doesn't make it right. Sin came forward. Esau was sent out because of their plan and because of the anger that came about. The plan of redemption is not thwarted by the sin of the people. God's will be done. This morning, the question is whose plan do we trust? Look at the heartbreak, the distrust, the frustration that happens in the life of Isaac and Rebekah. Whose plan do we trust, and how does it affect how we live? A plan that we form, a plan that we control, a plan that we make, or do we trust God? Do we trust God even when we may mean that we'll be barren for longer? Do we trust God that when it means we may be single for longer? Do we trust God when it means we may not have a job for longer? Do we trust God when it means that we won't have our desires met? Do we trust God when it means sacrificing self-gratification? Do we trust God when it means that we have to give up a child to the Lord? Do we trust God when it means that that child may not worship the Lord in the way that we do not like? Do we understand this picture here? Is Isaac and Rebekah are losing a child who is going to turn from the Lord? Do we understand that picture, that we don't get to control who worships and who doesn't worship the Lord? And that's something they're grappling with. Isaac, in much of his way, was hoping that his planning and his conniving would bring his child back into the fold, and he did not have that right. That is the picture. Do we trust God with our children to say, it's your child, your children, and you are the sovereign one here? I am not. Do we trust God to step back and say, I am faithful, you are the king, I am but your servant, and these children are yours to do with as you like, not mine to do with and control as I like, but they are yours. Do we trust God that far? Or are we going to step back and become the gods of our own creation because we don't like how God is handling you? Because that's what's happened in this story. Do we stop and recognize that because Isaac and Rebekah did not like the fact that Esau, their son, might be cast out, they decided they were going to step in and become God? That's the truth of the story. Parents in this room, grandparents in this room, do we recognize that? They didn't like the fact that their son would be sent out. Does anybody in this room like the idea that your child might be sent out away from the presence of God? Is anybody okay with that? No. But the question is, does that give us the right to assume the role of God in our lives, in the life of our family, in the life of our church, or in the life of anybody? No. And that's a really, really hard hard thing, because what we want most is for the people around us to worship and to love the God that we love. But the ultimate thing is the will and the plan of God to be done. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not our self-imposed will be done in the life of those that we want. Do we trust God with that? It's hard. And for every question that you can have after the sermon, I don't have the answers. Sorry. I just have the text. But that's the truth we deal with this morning in the line and the family of Abraham, is that's what he has presenting to us. Is a call to trust when ultimately nothing else matters, that his will is going to be done, that he is bringing about the plan of salvation. And it's not a new plan. It's a plan that's been in place from before creation that we know in Ephesians 1:4, and he's been working that throughout all eternity. And he's not having to come by and put the pieces together based on our actions. It's a done deal. Do we trust God? When we look back at the life of Rebecca, who traveled 400 miles by camel to marry some guy that she never knew, she's sitting there a couple of decades later, barren, and she's asking the questions, did I do the right thing? Yes, you did the right thing. When we as a church and we as a people ask the question, we're in those moments of struggle, doubt, and questioning, and are looking at life, and we have to sit back and say, did we do the right thing? Are we trusting God? Are we loving God? Are we worshiping God? If the answers to those questions is yes, then yes, you did the right thing, but it's not working out. It doesn't have to work out. That's the reality. Life here doesn't have to work based on our definition of work. It doesn't have to be okay. It doesn't have to meet our expectations. It doesn't have to do any of that. That's what we're learning in the book of Genesis. It doesn't have to have a solution. And you're saying, you're fired. Okay. Stinks, but okay. You're really bad at being a motivational speaker. I never really planned on doing that anyway. But that's the truth of it all. It doesn't have to work. In our struggling, in our pain, in our suffering, in our doubting, and everything that goes wrong and everything that's not working out, God's plan is still absolute. Amen. And if it takes 20 years, if it takes 60 years, if it takes a day, if God answers the prayer when you say amen, glory be to God. If God answers the prayers on the deathbed, glory be to God. The words of Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This morning, as we wrap up this time together, the question is, do we trust God? Or are we on one of those detours that we're like, I'm going to go this way far enough to make God make it right. I'm going to go, and he's going to have to make this right. No, he doesn't. God's plan is an absolute straight line, and it is done. The end of the book is written. The plan is complete. It's done. It's not a we're going to see how it works out plan. It's done. Do we trust God? This morning, as we come to a time of reflection, this time of remembering, I would encourage you to ask yourself these questions. Maybe you've never come to a point where you've actually trusted God. Maybe it's always been, I'm going to go about this my own way and I'm going to see if God brings me back. That's not trust. That's you being God. And we saw in Genesis 3 what being God brought about: death, destruction, and pain. This morning, if you were needing to come into a relationship with God for the first time, I would encourage you to take that card that's on the chair back in front of you and write, hey, I want to know what it's like to follow Jesus. Put some information on there that we can read so that we can contact you and follow up with you. Or maybe talk to us at the back. There are a whole lot of pastors in the room today. And we would love to chat with you, to follow up with you, and just pray with you. Maybe this morning in this time of reflection, you need to recognize the fact that you have been going your own way and surrender. Even if it means, surrendering means that God is going to take a child. God is going to take a spouse, a mother, a father, a cousin, a friend. It's not our decision to make, it's His. Our decision is to be the ambassadors of the gospel continuously, no matter what the outcome looks like. I'm going to pray. In about 2.5 minutes, the ushers are going to come and they're going to pass the plates. That's going to give you time to respond on the cards as you see fit. But don't miss an opportunity to respond to how God is leading you this morning. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the gospel. And we pray that this morning, as we stop and pause and reflect, that we would be honest. And God, we pray that you would speak to every person's heart in this room this morning.